What is going on, everyone? For those here already, just let me know in the comments if you can hear me. Just want to make sure everything's working. Hey, Mikey G, can you hear me? How's it going, Kiwi Cards? All right, sweet. Oh, shit, what did I do? All right, I'm back. I don't know. I haven't done one of these lives in a long time, so apologies if I'm like going to mess up at times, but I will bring your comments up as always. One thing I'll quickly note is your logos, as you can sort of see there, Kiwi Cards, is not going to show up properly because StreamYard, which is what I use to do my live streams, doesn't have a dark mode. And if I'm not using dark mode, basically my whole camera is washed out. So when your logos show up like Kiwi Cards is right now, that's the reason why. Obviously wait for a few more people to get started, but I thought it'd be good just to have a quick chat today. Just talk through some of the stuff that's popped off in the last 24 hours or so regarding PSA and Kurt's Card Care, and maybe touch on a few other things. Just a maybe quick hour live stream today. I was planning to do this tomorrow, but I think I've mentioned in a few of my videos, my wife is very heavily pregnant. Baby's coming in about 2 weeks, so this weekend is essentially set aside for me to do a bunch of stuff around the house, get the nursery ready, all that kind of stuff. So like I said, I was meant to do that today. Live stream was meant to be tomorrow, but I've had to, shift things around. So that's why it's such a short notice kind of thing. But how's everyone going? Yeah, need to soak. Yeah, 100%. I need to soak in some Kurt's Card Care juice. I think the last couple of days has been pretty interesting. And what's pretty, funny is like where the conversation has gone. I think a lot of people have forgotten, what the actual issue is on this whole situation. And you've got people in the last few days, it's basically been happening for months actually, around trying to sort of justify why cleaning is okay. And they'll say, well, wiping down a card with a microfiber cloth is okay. But that whole thing downplays the actual issues with cleaning, right? That's nothing comparable to what, soaking is or using chemicals on a card is. And it's just funny to see that you've got people, amplified even more so in the last few days, trying to say that stuff is comparable and one and the same and all that kind of thing. So, we'll see what you guys think down in the comments below. But I think, like I said, the news from PSA is very interesting. And the one thing I will say about PSA is that, it's not as clear cut as what they've probably made out to be. Like, they look terrible in this situation, in my opinion. Like, yes, they've done, the right thing according to their standards, but that does not mean that PSA in any way, shape or form know what the heck they're doing or what PSA's done is right and all that kind of thing. It's a really, funny situation. You've basically got PSA out there, trying to big note themselves, but at the same time, embarrassing themselves, which is pretty funny. It's a money grab, bro. I think the whole main thing you see on social media these days regarding sports cards is a money grab, unfortunately. I think most of the things that you do in fact see are people looking to do those quick flips and have that mindset, which is a bit disappointing, but it is what it is. Comparing it to card dent removal on sports card radio, people in the chat were, again, I've seen that sort of stuff before, but I don't think they're comparable. Again, people try to say like you put wax on a car and it's fine, but you add wax to a car and that stuff stays on the car, right? It's a compound that you have to apply on a consistent basis because it's there to protect the paint, right? So if you're adding wax, and yes, it is different makeups and it's using different ingredients and all that kind of thing on a card, what's that wax doing? Is it filling scratches? Is it going to stay there on the card? If it stays there on the card, what's going to happen long term? All those questions we've talked to death on my channel, but yeah, I don't want to keep repeating myself, but happy to chat through it with you guys today. Let me just bring up a few things. Give me 1 sec. My computer's, shitting itself. 1 sec. I'll bring up some articles and things like that we'll talk today, specifically around Kurt and his kit and some of his responses, because we did in fact have a response from Kurt regarding the PSA update of them decertifying his cards, which I think is pretty damn important. So just give me 1 sec. I'll share my screen. You guys are able to see what's on screen, right? Just let me know in the comments if you can see it, and then we'll get started. How's it going, mate? Show me one person who's using Kurt's Card Care on the PC cards. They're not using it to get highest selling prices. I think Kurt is probably the one person that we can unequivocally say he's using on his PC cards because he's shown some of that stuff in the past. But I agree. That's why it comes back to disclosure on this sort of stuff and telling people what you've done to it. Because for the most part, what you see online is people buy something like this, Jackie Robinson, the Kurtz card care or Kurtz card in question, to try and clean it, to bump it up, to get a higher grade, and then therefore make more money. And a lot of the people sort of justifying the behavior or talking about the fact they use it are not holding these things long term. And like I've always said, that stuff should tell you all you need to know. I'm assuming the one means you can see my screen. So this is sort of what kicked things off with regards to this recent PSA news. And I'll quickly jump to that now, because you will see that PSA have deactivated that Jackie Robinson card, what's sort of showing up over here. And this is a card that Kurt showed off in a live, I want to say like 6 or 7 weeks ago, if I remember correctly. It's in this video over here. I think it was 7 weeks ago. And in this video, he basically walks through what he sort of did to this card. And what he did was soak it. And I think he said he soaked it for like 30 minutes, let it dry, did a few other things on the card to remove some of the stains and all that kind of thing, and then submitted it. Now, I'm fairly certain Kurt showed the results, which is how Tiffany Cards was able to confirm that it was in fact the same Jackie Robinson card, which is also what these circles are there to also confirm to people looking at it. But after PSA seeing this, after PSA seeing the video in question, they've gone ahead and decertified the one card, but then also gone ahead and decertified the rest of Kurt's order, which is, a big thing for them to do, especially considering where, things have gone in recent months, in particular for that Wemby 1-on-1, where the guys basically hit that card, they took it to PSA, and then as they picked it up from PSA, they gave a shout out to Kurt and all that kind of thing. They didn't really do anything about it, but in this particular instance, they've decided to try and decertify it. And it's a line in the sand moment, according to some, but I don't think it's that clear cut. I'll get to my thoughts on that in a sec. I'll just quickly catch up on the comments, because I think PSA could be doing more, but I'll get to Kurt's comments as well in a second. I'm just trying to play catch up, so just bear with me, guys. Wouldn't PSA flag and mark his whole account? Why just one submission? I think that's probably the next step they're going to do, to be honest. There was a few people, I think Neo Cards and Comics put out a video today, and Michael Ham, who I've, shouted out lots of times on this channel before, left a comment, and I sort of replied to him because I think he was sort of asking the question, well, why have they gone ahead and decertified everything in that order? And he said, shouldn't they really only do it for the card they can confirm was soaked and goes against their policies? And the reason why these companies go ahead and do those things is because they now not have trust in him as an individual, right? If you've got somebody that's sort of knowingly submitting something against terms and services, right, their T's and C's are pretty clear saying you cannot do this stuff to cards. So the fact that you've got somebody knowingly submit that then raises questions about everything else this guy's touching. And he may not have done anything else to those other cards he submitted, but the risk appetite that PSA has to be maintained. And from their perspective, you're dealing with cards that are now questionable, and they're a reputable brand. I'll say that with the Rabbities, right? They've got to try and maintain that perception. So from them, it doesn't make sense. They're going to say, okay, let's get rid of everything because we can't trust this person. So back to your point, Jeezy, I think they're going to basically look to maybe even ban him. I would not be shocked if that happened. And, some people will say that's right, that's wrong, whatever. It's not a new thing from PSA. And when you look at some of these, known trimmers in the past, or people that have had really significant trimming and altering allegations, like Evan Mathis as an example, I'm fairly certain he's still banned by PSA. Typically, they go ahead and do that because, like I said, they lose trust in you as a submitter. And if you're, intentionally submitting something and you're breaching those terms and conditions, they can't trust you. They don't want to put their name, their brand on something that is that questionable. Now, obviously, that raises a heck of a lot more questions, particularly around the Wemby, particularly around all the other things he's submitted in the past. But, that's sort of where we're sitting right here, right now. You got Miguel basically saying, so is card restoration frowned upon? What's the percentage of people that actually understand what's going on, or people that think that it's like, said, a money grab? I think that's a big question. One of the things I spoke to in my video the other day was how there is not enough fact-based research behind what this stuff does to cards. People are putting things on cards, and, Kurt did a live stream with Jeremy Lee, I think a week or so ago, and he basically says, based on his experiences, he's not seen anything like that, right? He's not seen any long-term damage. He's not seen stains return. But if you search around the internet, you do in fact see some of that stuff happening. So what, sort of needs to happen, I think, is we need to have more, experiments done and people actually test what the long-term issues are of these cards. Have a test, have a control, put some cards in a slab after they've been altered, and check in on them, every few months and see if things actually get worse. And does the wax actually damage the card? Maybe, maybe not. But that's sort of what we need to understand. And, I think in general it's frowned upon because people don't know what is going to happen when you're adding additives and chemicals to cards, right? Or you're soaking them in a liquid for 30 minutes, right? We don't know what's going to happen. And I think the big thing is people want to, understand what it is they're buying. And I think that's also where the concern comes in, because you've got people doing it and they're not disclosing it. And, the question that you should always push back on people with stuff like this is, let's say you get the same, the Grail card you want. Let's not name the card specifically, but it's a Grail card. It's in a PSA 10 and they're side by side. And the person selling it to you says this one was cleaned or this one was soaked in distilled water for 30 minutes and then dried, and this one wasn't. This one's pack fresh. They're the same price. Which one are you going to buy? I would be shocked if people said they didn't care which one they would buy. I think if all things were equal, they would buy the one that they know wasn't, molested in any way, shape, or form. And that's where the problem comes, because you've got people not disclosing it. And I think that's what people are sort of missing the point of with this whole situation. It just comes down to, you can do what you want and you can have fun within your hobby and how you want to collect all you want. And if you enjoy, fixing cards and improving them, that's all well and good. But if you want to sell it to me, at least give me the option to make my own mind up on what I want to do with that, because I might not be okay with it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that feel that way, which is why, again, PSA have come out and said what they have. And it was really disappointing as well when that whole Wembanyama thing came up, that people basically said, well, PSA is signing off on it, irrespective of the fact that their president came out and gave a statement saying, we don't condone this kind of crap. We just can't prove it in this instance. People are missing the fact that PSA policy says this is not okay. Now, PSA can't spot it. That's a big bloody problem. But that's a different thing to talk to, right? PSA say it's not okay. So if you're, submitting it, that's deception. I can't stand for that, in my opinion. Kiwi Cards, yeah, he said he also destroyed hundreds of cards. I've got no doubt that Kurt knows what he's doing. He's been doing this for a heck of a long time. Like I said in the past, I've appreciated the fact that he's transparent in the sense that he shows the cards on camera and he shows the serial numbers. Now, he doesn't show the serial numbers for the cards that his customers send in to show what they've improved, but he himself does. Now, I don't like the fact that people hide it, but at least he has done that. So, if he hadn't done that, this card wouldn't have been caught by PSA. So, I give him some credit for being transparent. I just don't like the practice, but I just want to make sure that stuff is being disclosed if I'm going to buy it. And like I said, he's got the experience. He just needs to sort of bring that comfort that he has on why this stuff is okay to the rest of the hobby, because if he doesn't, or if he doesn't actually know, and his experience hasn't given him that comfort that there is no long-term issues, and that's a problem as well, right? Because he shouldn't be selling a product, in my opinion. Again, this is just my opinion. If you're not sure what this stuff is going to do long-term, right? That's another thing that needs to be talked to a bit further. I'll quickly catch on the comments, and then I'll get to Kurt's response to the PSA decertification. Bobby 2 Pops breaks. Yes, it is frowned upon. Restored cards and comics are only worth 1/10 of the unrestored. I haven't really paid a lot of attention to comic books in the last few years. I am a big comic book collector. I don't really grade them anymore. I mainly buy, older stuff that is in the older CGC labels and things like that. So the whole, stance on pressing and all that kind of thing doesn't really impact me. Now, for those of you that are not comic book collectors, CGC used to treat pressing, which is like heat pressed and wet pressed, in an effort to remove wrinkles out of pages and coloring and dirt and all that kind of stuff. They used to frown upon that. And then I can't recall exactly when the change happened, but they now offer it as a service, right? So I'd be curious to see whether the ones that are currently being restored and pressed by CGC are also selling for less of a premium, but maybe you can confirm that for me, Bobby 2 Pops breaks. Kiwi Cards, pull a pack fresh card and soak it in. What a joke, I agree. It was probably all vintage also that could have been soaked in Kurt's juice, possibly as well. I haven't seen what the rest of the submission is. I'm sure he probably showed it off, but like you said, Richard Thomas, transparency is very important, and that's the most important thing, right? How can you know when he hasn't got the data? He might have the data in his brain, right? He seems like an old school kind of dude. I can sort of believe, I definitely believe him when he says he's been doing this for a long time, right? And he knows what he's doing, because if you watch his videos, the stuff that he does on these cards is amazing, right? There's no way you can downplay that. He turns some really shitty looking cards into some really amazing ones. So it's clear he's got the experience, but he needs to, take that experience and make it more readily available for people that have questions like you and I, that they can then be made comfortable with what's going on, right? If he's so confident and comfortable in his own mind, he needs to somehow get that out there so the rest of the hobby can sort of say, okay, mate, I see what you're going on now. I can see that you've done these tests and you've got these things that you can compare back to that show that there is no long-term issues or anything like that, you've basically sold me on the whole thing. I'm now confident that this stuff's okay. But until he does that, you can't begrudge people for asking questions, right? So that's just my opinion on it all. How's it going, Global? Haven't seen you for a while. Yeah, the sports card radio from a few years ago was also quite good on that, where they cut up their own card, which was quite nice. How's it going, Warlock? I said this from the get. Kurt's card care was a bad thing to do to cards. Like possibly, but again, you know, it sort of is what it is. People can do what they want to their own cards. It just comes down to disclosure for me. And like I think, like I said in my video the other day on this topic, he could have gone a bit deeper on some of the questions that Jeremy Lee was asking him, because it comes back to sharing that knowledge he has. So I think there's sort of a long way to go there. But I'm just rambling now. Let me quickly catch up on the comments, and then we'll jump to Kurt's response. Like I said, how's it going, mate? Wiping a card down with microfiber cloth is acceptable. I agree. The spa treatment is completely different. How's it going, GG? Appreciate the support. Yeah, I don't agree with pressing either. So like that's something that I still try and avoid as much as possible. But that's just me personally. It's a strange thing that the comic community has bought into that, because, you know, 10, 15 years ago, it was, you know, severely frowned upon. But it is what it is. What else is there here? I can see a world that PSA will offer a cleaning service for cards before entering into the grading process. I completely agree on that. And the reason why is because they can't spot this crap half the time. So it is utterly ridiculous, in my opinion, that PSA have these standards, right? They've got these standards in their process to say this stuff is not okay, and then they can't spot it. So in my mind, I can understand why they have that standard there, but if you can't uphold it, why do you even have it there? Like, why do you even care? If you wanted to sort of milk the situation even more, start offering it as a service, start getting people trained up, and then you can make even more money. And I think that logic is the reason why PSA, you know, might do that eventually, because right here, right now, they look idiotic, right? They look so stupid because there are so many other cards out there that they can't spot, and they have to rely on the internet to tell them, guess what, this card had something done to it. And that's a big red flag for them as a business as well, in my opinion. You know, you can shit on Kurt all you want, but at the same time, you need to put equal blame to PSA not being able to do their own job, in my opinion. We also have a response from them in relation to the Kurt situation. Exactly, long-term data. So I'm sure Kurt has stuff on hand, right? You'd like to think he would, that he said cards that he's been doing this stuff to for 10 years. So if he still has those, maybe he's got before and after photos. And if he doesn't, let's start documenting it now so we can have that point of reference to make people comfortable. Because if you're somebody that is so okay with this kind of behavior, right? You're so okay that cleaning and soaking does no long-term damage to a card, prove it, right? If you're so okay with it, prove it, because it should be easy to prove, right? And I think that's all people are sort of asking for, right? It's not that big of a question. And there's been so much hate online about people asking these kinds of questions. And my logic is like, what is the big deal? Like, why are you so angry at me wanting to be comfortable with what it is I'm buying? To want to be comfortable that, you know, people are not getting ripped off. People are not paying a premium for a card that the person has deceptively used something on it and then sold it to them without disclosure, that is going to then leave them with an inferior card in, you know, 5 years' time, right? A card that then all of a sudden declines in value because it deteriorates within the slab. You know, is that even a possibility? I don't know, but that's not a bad question to be asking. You can't push back on anybody, you know, for doing it. Again, it comes back to disclosure. How's it going? I'm a big fan of the great man, Mr. Mangini Collection, so do check out his channel. And I agree, it is a whole new hobby, right? People are, you know, sort of changing the times. It just, you know, it's hard to get used to, but I just want that disclosure, right? I don't know what else to ask beyond that. Yeah, I think this is in relation to what his spray is made up of, right? And I'm not sure, because I'm obviously not based in the US. I think it's like safety data sheet. Is that what the SDS stands for? Apparently, like, people were talking in the comments of the Jeremy Lee live with Kurt that, you know, in order to have certain, you know, alcoholic content in there, I forget what the term is. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong in the comments or clarify for me. But you need to be disclosing that in order to sell it and especially ship it into multiple states. And, you know, currently he's not doing that with his product because he doesn't disclose what the ingredients are. And apparently that's a big issue, but I'm not sure if that's currently being disclosed. For these reasons, you've got Mr. Mangini basically saying the same thing. From what I've seen, though, it's not just distilled water. There was somebody that apparently tested it. I can't verify this, but in a comment they said that their wife was a chemist and it did have, I I can't think of what type of alcohol it is. Somebody can confirm. I forget what the word is. My brain is, breaking right now, but it has to have a certain percentage. And apparently this thing pulled up or showed up when she did the test or something along those lines. My brain is not working. I think this is, again, the big thing, like what's going to happen long term, what's actually in these things. Are these things corrosive? Are these things chemicals? Are these things going to damage things? Auburn35 is also a good friend of the channel, so I do appreciate him being in here. Again, I will apologize for those of you that didn't see the start. Your profiles might show up funny on my screen. I'm using dark mode on Google Chrome, and it's playing with your images. That's why your little avatar pictures look different. Nat has mentioned that Gemma Mint, the fingerprint tech, is only being used manually. Would be interesting to know if it was used. I think it's fair to say that it's not being used, because I would genuinely think that if this stuff was more prevalent and PSA were actively using it, we'd see it more often. And basically what this technology is a way for, if I remember correctly, a way for PSA to mark a card and give it a fingerprint so they can spot it again if somebody tries to resubmit. Because, what happens now is people don't get the grade they want, and then they resubmit to the grading company, and then they get a higher grade. And what PSA is trying to do with this technology is make sure that doesn't happen. Like I could sort of see where you're coming from when you're saying you don't blame Kurt. I think he could be doing more to help his case, 100%. I think grading itself, they have to have the finger pointed at them as well. But I think you can safely point the finger at any single person out there that is deceptively selling this stuff to people and not disclosing what they've done to it, because there is no, real comfort around what the long-term issues are. Because you can read things online. Go check out Net54, go check out Blow It forums. There are people talking about this sort of stuff where things become brittle over time. Some of these cards are disintegrating and all that kind of thing. And whilst, yes, these are small pockets and stories here and there, it's enough to sort of sit back and say, what is actually going on? Glue residue has come, do you mean has come back? Yeah, so glue residue has come back after slabbed on old cards, which again, I think is what, Orlando's video from A Collector's Dream is basically showing. The stain has returned over years, and I'm sure a lot more of that stuff has happened. And I think in the current age where it very much looks like more and more people, are using techniques like this, it's like, well, are we going to see this show up more often? The Jace has confirmed MSDS, material safety data sheet. Again, I think that just has to disclose what's in there. They claimed it was just distilled water with a bit of peroxide. Thank you, Zar Crazy One. Again, he's also a friend of the channel. I've met him a few times. Can you imagine if it does damage cards with the markets? The one caveat here is, if this stuff is going on cards and it does in fact damage them, if it's in a PSA slab, you should be thanking God, right? Because basically PSA have a guarantee. So if all of a sudden the card deteriorates and it doesn't match the label anymore, PSA will, pay you out market value. But again, that's not, the perfect situation that you want to be having, but it is what it is. Peroxide again over here, rubbing alcohol makes sense. It is used to remove stains from microfiber, but if so, it would need warning labels. So I'm sort of keen to see what's going to happen from that. I think there's a lot of people pushing back on Kurt around what's in his product. So I think we're going to see some things change in that space. Because he just seems like a simple dude trying to be an entrepreneur and make a living in terms of making his product, and maybe he doesn't quite know all these, standards and things he needs to apply when it comes to his products. But we could see more in that space regarding, whether he's breached anything. And I'm not wishing ill will on him at all or anything like that, but that's just based on what people are sort of saying, in the comments. Warlock again, and guys, here's another angle. None of these guys doing this stuff from grading to cleaning are accredited or has a degree in the space. There's no certification from an expert. I think that's also an important thing. I said it in my last video. Kurt says he's been doing this for 10, 15 years, whatever it is, right? Or practically his whole life. And you don't need a degree. You don't need to be certified to be an expert in a field, but it gives you more credence, right? And there was a few things he sort of said on that Jeremy Lee live stream where he talked about things being scientifically not possible. Like, he's not a scientist, so when he says that, it's like, take it with a grain of salt. But I don't want to discredit him to the point where we don't listen to what he says, right? Because he's been doing this for a long time. So like I said earlier, if he's very comfortable and confident that this stuff does no damage, like, it should be easy for him to prove. And I think he could do a lot for himself and for, the hobby if he starts doing some of these experiments and starts running some of these tests to actually convey to us that, it is okay, right? So I don't want to discredit him because, again, you can be somebody that's been working in a field for a long time and not need a degree in order to be taken seriously, but you guys get where I'm going with that. Dan's Vintage Baseball. Dan, much respect as always, but this Kurt's thing is 100% a scam, both in the card soaking, but also charging $30 for a few ounces of easily available liquid. You know, I agree. Like, I'm very much against it. You should know that by now, but I just want to understand a bit more, right? And I'm trying to be, you know, more fair and balanced on it because I want to try and get an outcome that sort of benefits everybody within this hobby. And I think I'm trying to do the old, you know, you catch more flies with honey or whatever the saying is, right? Yes, you have to use distilled water in a humidor. I think I'm caught up on comments pretty much now. He's an expert, but expert's the most corrupt. That's probably fair. I'll let others decide. But what I want to quickly show you is actually this article here that was posted by Collect. So this is the company that, or the media brand that Darren Ravel has now started. There's also lots of questions about how I want to talk to and about Darren Ravel because he's had some, you know, questionable things in the past. But he actually got a response from Kurt, and I'll talk you through this article in case you guys haven't seen it, because I think this only got posted, I want to say 3 or 4 hours ago. And what he essentially does is covers basically what went down, you know, the whole Tiffany card situation, but I don't think he mentions him, which is also quite a common thing from Darren. But talks through basically what happened, the PSA decertification, and then goes on to talk about, you know, what PSA stance is, and actually gets a response from Kurt as well. And he gives, like I said, some context as to what the card is in question. And then, like I said, chases up with PSA themselves. And what Ryan Hodge, who's the president of Collectors, i.e. the parent company of PSA, he goes on to say and reiterate, right, this stance is well known, it's been told time and time again by PSA, but people seem to forget it. He goes on to say, we are fine with blowing on it or using a dab of water, not all water, I think that's meant to say of, or using a microfiber cloth to clean it. But when you are doing much more, we're not on board. So basically what he's saying is when you're adding wax, when you're soaking it, that's not the same as using a wipe down, right, guys? You need to be more clear on what the policies are, and the people that are trying to say that this stuff is okay and that then therefore makes this stuff okay is a bit ridiculous in my opinion. They basically go on to sort of reiterate their stance. They're the ones with the financial obligations, i.e. they've got a brand and prestige to maintain. If they're grading cards that look like this and are allowing stuff like this through, then that damages them long term. He goes on to say, we're not comfortable grading these cards when we have to be standing behind them for years down the road. I think this is sort of a pretty laughable statement from PSA because they cannot tell, right? They've got these standards. They want to be seen as a company that has to stand behind these things because they have the financial obligations, but they need to see an Instagram video for them to sort of do this. And that doesn't mean they shouldn't have blocked it after seeing the Instagram video, but it comes back to PSA. Well, like I said earlier, if you can't do your job and you've got standards designed around something and you can't spot it, why are those standards even there? Like, what are you guys doing, right? You need to be doing better. It's not okay. It's completely unacceptable that you guys as a business need to see an Instagram video in order to spot this sort of stuff, right? You're the leader in this space. So what the heck are you doing that you have to rely on that in the first place? The Ravel article basically goes on to say that Cologne, which is Kurt's surname, does not disclose what ingredients are in his spray, although he maintains they are all natural and won't hurt the cardboard. Again, this is a very important thing. I'd like to see what, you know, evidence we have behind that to make him so comfortable, but he's well within his rights to have that stance. His website does that to damage the card. I don't know what that sentence is meant to say. We'll ignore it because it looks like it's worded poorly. Cologne basically responds, Kurt responds and sort of says, attributes the battle with PSA to cancel culture. He says, I have nothing to hide. My videos are uncut. I'm showing people what I've been doing to my cards for 20 years and the marketplace has clearly spoken. I have more than 20,000 customers using my product. It's the 5 or 6 trolls that scream the loudest that give me issues. And again, the fact that he's referring to us as trolls, I think is a really disappointing take on his part. Cologne said he laughs at people who paint him to be a nefarious character. I do this because I love it. And here people are treating me like I'm some trimmer. There's a lot of other fuckery going on within the hobby. He's basically trying to say that stuff is significantly worse. This stuff should be seen as okay. Kurt then basically says he's surprised PSA officials haven't called him to talk. I come in peace and I'm really open-minded. Let's exchange practices and data with each other, which, you know, I think is a really important thing, right? And that's basically what the next step should be in the hobby. But I'm curious to see what's going to come from that because I have a strong belief and strong opinion that we're probably not going to get to a point where we can prove that this stuff is okay. Because I think if we could have, we probably already would have been there. But that's just my opinion. Hodge said PSA is charged with staying ahead of trends given the financial liability they have if something that restores a card changes its condition in future years, i.e. what the big fucking risk is, right? This is a huge issue, and nobody can really answer that this stuff is okay or prove that it's okay and prove that it doesn't damage things long term. He said if people want to crack a card out and resubmit, they can, but we want real legitimate items coming back, not items that were manipulated. And like I said earlier, PSA can't tell the difference, so it's a pretty laughable statement from them. But I just thought those were pretty interesting comments from Kurt. Like I said, it seems like he wants to have a conversation with PSA, but again, it's pretty interesting that he's sort of taken that stance, basically saying that all of us that are asking very fair questions are, trolls. And I've tried to reach out to him in the past. I didn't get a response. The first time I posted some videos, I got a response from him telling me that basically he was disappointed and I should have reached out to him first and that I look like I'm a hater and all that kind of stuff. And, I just need to get over it because I need to have fun cleaning cards and all that kind of thing. And it's not a big issue. I posted some other videos at the start of the year that he responded to me on again. I reiterated that I wanted to have a conversation with him because I thought I could be fair and balanced. He is of the position that I'm a troll and I want other people to hate him, which is a bit disappointing because if you guys have seen, all my videos on this topic, I've never been one to criticize Kurt specifically, right? I've never said he's a bad person. I've never said that he's doing this to scam intentionally or anything like that. I've basically just asked a question about the stuff that you're putting on the card. Is that going to damage it long term? Why are people so okay with not disclosing it? What does that mean for the poor people? And when I say poor people, I mean the average collector, not poor in the sense financially, poor as in woe is me kind of thing. That they're going to buy this card, they're going to buy a PC card that costs a fortune, that all of a sudden turns to shit in a few years' time. Like, I feel sorry for that fucking person because that's not fair. That's not right. And it's just one of those things that people are sort of like brushing aside when they're saying, well, it's only the trolls shitting on us for this kind of thing. It's like, no, mate. Like, it's not just trolls. You can't say people that are asking genuine questions are just trolls. I just think it's a bit BS, but I'm keen to hear what you guys have to say. Now, let me catch up on the chat because I think I'm really far behind now. Let's see. You're talking about dodging taxes. I'm not sure what to talk to on that. About this specific situation. What is Labatt? Is that like a cleaning product in the States or something? I'm not sure what that is, but hopefully you're just joking. You didn't actually do that. Yes, this is a huge PSA. Like again, this is another tricky situation that PSA have to manage, in my opinion, where you've got like all these, standards being applied, and it's like, okay, well, in this instance, they retracted these Kurt cards, right? Decertified them, but how many other things have they missed? How many other things have they not applied the same level of, focus to, magnification to? Like, are there other cards out there that, they've missed? And I think obviously the short answer is yes. And then the question becomes, well, what does that mean? What does that mean for them as a business? Because they have a guarantee in place. They protect people who have their cards, in a slab, right? They stand by their grade. What does that mean long term? How many of these things have slipped through? How many of these things are going to turn to shit over the years, if any, right? There's a heck of a lot of questions. So just, a bit of a gray area because, again, I'm rambling now, but these graders, like, guys, if you can't spot it, why do you have standards around it? And if you can't spot it, why do we treat you like you're on this fucking huge pedestal that you're the greatest company known to man when you can't even do what, is expected of you? And apologies for the swearing, but it is the weekend and I've got a lot on and I'm in a mood today. Kiwi cards, because who's to say a card PSA is authenticated isn't soaked? I think that's the huge red flag, right? And there's potentially a big liability on their hands. Let's hypothetically say, let's talk to the guarantee first, right? PSA have a guarantee in place, and what that basically means is if a card turns out to be fake, patch swap, altered in some capacity, and the grade no longer reflects what their, the card no longer reflects what their grade says, they're going to pay you out as a customer if you can prove that the fact is the case, right? The fact that it was altered, whatever. So them as a business on their balance sheet would be having a liability in place or a provision in place, I should say, to cover for this kind of thing. They need to cover for the fact that, okay, we have this many graded cards out there. We're going to estimate that we've maybe made a mistake in 5% of the case. This is what we think the average market value is of the cards that we do in fact grade. We need to keep this cash on hand to pay out customers if this stuff ever happens. But let's just hypothetically say that, all of a sudden there is significantly more cards that have, been altered in some capacity that they've missed. They've all been soaked. Let's say like a huge chunk of these cards have been soaked that represent, 2 or 3 times what they would have estimated their liability to be. that could send them bankrupt, in the grand scheme of things. They might not have enough cash on hand to make sure they can facilitate all those, because if something like that happened and then overnight all these cards became brittle and they cracked or stains returned and all these customers came back to them and said, well, for this, 3-year period where you're grading these cards, you completely missed the boat. You didn't action anything quick enough. You let so many things slip through. You basically let the floodgates open because you didn't react quick enough. You need to pay us out. And that payout could send them broke. Am I talking at my ass there a little bit? Possibly, but that's sort of where your mind has to go with stuff like this. Financially, this could be a big problem for PSA. And, then the trickle-down effect is to a loss of business. People don't trust them. Their brand needs to mean something, especially when they're portraying themselves as being, the absolute, leader in this space. And those are the kinds of questions that, trickle down from something as simple as, well, I'm just soaking a card. It's not a big deal. It's like, well, this is all the stuff that comes off the back of that, right? That's why it's a big deal. And that's why these questions, need to be answered. Unfortunately, in a market where the money is to be made, people will do these things. Can't believe we're at a point where we are submerging cards. I completely agree. It's not surprising. This stuff always happens. It's a free market, right? People are always going to try and find loopholes and try and get the advantage. But we just need to be expecting more of these graders to look after us as customers, right? Because currently they're not doing it as well as what they could be, in my opinion. The grading companies are complicit in the drive to do things. I think the whole hobby is right now. The whole hobby is framed around trying to maximize your money and move on to the next thing, right? It's what's basically built the whole hobby and propped up the card collecting industry to where it is, right? It's the whole grade and flip kind of mentality. Like, yes, obviously there's a lot of collectors out there and it's still a big chunk of the representation. I think the flippers are a small minority, but they're the ones that are pumping in most of the money, in my opinion. And that's just something, again, that then is facilitated. It's like a big circle jerk, just never ending, right? And it's all benefiting each other, right? Because the more people that buy Kurt's Card Care and other products like Mr. Minty and all that kind of thing are going to be submitting things to PSA. So technically it's a mutual benefit for both of them, right? Everyone makes money and everyone keeps submitting, right? So that's why I'm also surprised that PSA even came out and decertified these things, because, in the past, there's been plenty of other, videos of Kurt's stuff that have been submitted that they've not, responded to, and they've also ignored the, videos and all that kind of thing. So it's like, well, what's happening right here, right now to have them react like that? That's what also makes me think maybe there's a bit more to come as well. And I've just realized I'm talking a lot. So if you guys have any questions, also ask them down below. They don't want the smoke of being on the hook if it goes wrong. Like, I think it's already past that. I think they already are on the hook. And, the last few years should really concern them, especially when they sort of went from doing, 100,000 cards a month or whatever it was to doing over 1 million. That's a big change for your risk appetite as a business. How many things slip through? Is it 10%? Is it less? Like, how many things are getting through the cracks that are all of a sudden going to be this big, liability for them at some point in the future, right? That stuff would concern me as a business, because we've seen really inconsistencies with how they've graded, cards coming back as 6s, getting resubmitted, coming back as 10s. If you're seeing that big of a swing in a grade, are you seeing that same big of a swing when it comes to the authenticity of a card and all that kind of stuff, right? That should be quite concerning for them, given the volume they've basically gone through. Apologies for the drinks break. He loves the money. I think everyone in this hobby loves the money, actually. 20,000 times $50 is all he cares about. That's fair. But again, I think he's getting a lot of attention now, and I don't wish bad upon anyone, but like you saw in the comments of the Jeremy Lee live stream, if you did in fact see it, there's people now asking questions about what's in his product. I think there were some people here mentioning it earlier too. Does he have the right licenses and things to be selling this and shipping things across the states and all that kind of stuff? It's just a bit, this could blow up a lot bigger than what it currently is, and it's like a watch this space kind of thing. Because again, I'll reiterate, I like the fact that he shows this stuff. I don't like the fact that people are learning from it, because that sort of festers the whole shithousery and deception. But at least in his case, he's showing serials and things like that. So it lets buyers be informed. And I think that's the most important thing at the end of the day. Yeah, that is a lot of money. Have fun cleaning cards. He says he's having fun. I'm sure he finds it fun, finds it cathartic. But you guys, it's just very deceptive when people are sort of doing it and then not disclosing it. And I said that earlier. Did I see the video from Vintage Sports Shack? I think people are really tired of the deception in the community with submitting altered cards to PSA and then getting them through. I don't think so, but I probably will check it out after this. I think the deception is poor across the board, right? It's deceptive and disappointing that people are sort of doing it and they're not telling people, but then also it's just, I think the other thing, okay, very quickly. One of the things that's been really disappointing about the discussion point today was over the last few days, and you can see a lot of this on Twitter actually, on Tiffany Card's post, but you've got people, being more mad at PSA than the people submitting these things. And I think you can blame them equally, right? You don't have to hate one over the other. Like, because PSA can't do their bloody job, you should be filthy at them for that. You should be angry at them for that. And the fact that you've got people, knowingly, deceptively submitting this stuff to PSA after doing things that go against the T's and C's is just as bad. You can blame them equally, right? They don't have to be mutually exclusive. Is that the word? You don't have to just hate one of them. You can hate both. And so much of the conversation was like, well, who gives a shit, right? Let's just hate PSA. It's like, no. Like, you can shit on both people in that specific instance. It's unacceptable on both parts, and there's not one that sort of stands up over the other. In my opinion, anyway. Prism cards have a film over it. Yes, they do. But again, I'd be curious to see like what the wax or what the alcohol does to it long term. Does this stuff actually maintain? Does it actually all evaporate? Does it actually all get wiped off? Is there any residue? Does that stuff damage, the more modern cards more so than maybe it does the older cards, or vice versa, right? There's all these things that sort of need to be answered. Losing trust in PSA would be bad for the whole community. Because I think there was a comment earlier. Shattered, which means if people can't trust the slabs and they can't trust evaluations, which means the card goes to zero, and the potential is there because of this shit. And I agree, it goes to what I was talking about earlier, right? Where I actually spoke about this a few weeks ago for a different reason when it came to Beckett, because we've seen that collectors are very fickle and they'll move to where the herd basically moves. And let's just hypothetically say that situation I explained earlier for PSA ends up being true and they actually have all these issues. It's gonna be really quick for people to move to a different grader, right? They're not gonna just disappear from the hobby altogether. Some people might that have all this money invested, but it's why it always comes back to buy the freaking card, not the holder, and don't place blind trust in a label. Don't place blind trust in a grader. Like, this is what you're being potentially exposed to, right? A company that dropped the ball for a few years, or maybe even longer, and missed all these things. Then overnight, the floodgates are open and things turn to shit, right? You need to be, being a bit more switched on with how you approach your collecting and not just buying a slab because it's PSA and you think PSA is the best. Because, tomorrow we could wake up and BGS could be the best. And that sounds very out there right now, but, we're very fickle in this space. People just go where the herd goes. So it's not out of the realm of possibility, right? And it's just one of those things. Again, I'll reiterate. When I collect my cards, I buy a lot of, obviously I'm a PCer, right? I've been a collector my whole life, like this Chelsea card. That was bought through profits of selling other cards. I've talked to this countless times. The whole reason why I do that is that if something like this was ever to pop off where a company turned to shit, or, the hobby became, back to what it was 5-6 years ago where things were a lot more affordable, I'm not out of pocket. I've paid for it with profits through, selling other cards and all that kind of thing. I can rest easy at it. Yes, technically I could have sold this when, prices were high and made even more money, but you know what? I want the card for my collection, and I feel a lot easier if I technically cost me $0 out of pocket. But I've talked to that plenty of times on the channel. I'm sure many of you guys do the same thing. It sounds bad to say you can't trust, any businesses or anything like that, but it's more about, not trusting them. It's about, trusting yourself and doing the best thing for you. And doing the best thing for you is not, just following the herd or the sheep mentality. So it's beer. Well, you should have drank it too. I didn't catch the UFC on the weekend, but I saw the Max Holloway knockout, and that was absolutely mental. So keen to see if he fights Volkanovski for a fourth time, actually, because that would be a great fight for the BMF belt. Mike Petty, Kurtz was in Strongsville today shopping for creased cards. Not sure if that was a joke or not, but I saw he's actually going to a few card shows now, which is pretty interesting. 10 minutes behind chat, guys. I'll do my best to catch up. What PSA could do in the meantime is to clarify or decertify that one-of-one Wemby. I don't, that's a can of worms for them because I don't think they can prove it. And it goes back to what I said earlier, right? The only reason why they decertified this, Kurt's order, or the only reason why they decertified Kurt's submission is because they saw the video. If they didn't see the video of that Jackie Robinson getting soaked, which I can actually play it for you now, give me one sec. if they didn't, see this video, they wouldn't have, I'll let it play in the background, then when it actually gets to the circuit part, I'll bring it back up. But if they didn't see the video, they wouldn't have decertified it. So they've got no leg to stand on with this Wemby, in my opinion. There's a reason why they didn't decertify it when they had the chance. Evidence of alteration was very interesting to see in the article description. Did PSA use Kurt's video or something else? They would have had to have used Kurt's video, because it wouldn't have been graded if they noticed it earlier, right? It had to be Kurt's video and Kurt's video alone, in my opinion. Now, for the people soaking these cards, I would love to know how many cards are soaked in their own collection, if they have any at all, or just selling the picks and shovels. And I think that's another analogy that we saw in the Jeremy Lee video, where people, comparing it to the Gold Rush boom. It's better to be, selling the shovels and the pans than, getting the gold for yourself, right? And that could be the case here too. I think a lot of people are actually doing exactly this, but I don't think that's the case for everybody. And I think somebody like Kurt maybe is not doing that. But again, I'd like him to clarify that a bit further as well. Dan, you had a video a while back about a card cleaner named Jonah who scammed some of my friends on Twitter. That guy got caught with SGC. Yeah, exactly. So that's actually an interesting video where, was it trimmed or soaked, Dan? I don't recall. But I had a really big back and forth with this guy, and he sort of threatened me and all this kind of stuff because he posted some videos on Twitter on some photos, and it came out that he did in fact soak a card and got the card bumped up at SGC, and he didn't disclose it to the buyer. And the reason why it was interesting was because he initially had the card lined up to sell to somebody raw. So basically it was, I think, in a PSA slab originally. I could be wrong on that. He cracked it out. He soaked it to clean it. He went to then sell it to somebody and had this person lined up. The card came back as altered from PSA. I can't recall maybe what else was done to the card, but then the person obviously said, well, it's been altered, PSA have rejected it, I don't want to buy it. So then, if I recall what happened off the back of that, he then sent it into SGC, and SGC graded it. He went to sell it to somebody else, and that's when the original person replied back and said, like, what the fuck are you doing, kind of thing. Like, did you disclose it to this person? And it turns out he didn't, apparently. So it's an interesting one. I'll put probably that link to that video in the description later on. I don't recall how long ago that was, but that's just basically the high level of the situation. And that is exactly where a lot of people's concerns come from. So thank you for reminding me of that, Dan, because I actually completely forgot about it. But that's the clearest case of where the problems arise with stuff like this, where you've got somebody trying to sell something, they reject it because they don't want it, because they're not comfortable owning it, because it's been altered. They then, send it to SGC and completely fail to disclose the fact that it was previously, ignored or pushed away by PSA. And that's a big problem. And anyone that tries to say otherwise is an idiot, unfortunately. If he has the historical data on cards he has tested and treated, he won't release it, probably because the cards ended up being fucked and wants to hide that fact. I probably sound like an idiot for saying this, but I think it's probably more the fact that he just doesn't have that recorded. I want to give everybody a chance. I like to think that maybe he just doesn't have it, doesn't show it because he doesn't have it, as opposed to him intentionally hiding it. But I don't know the guy or anything like that, so that could just me be being too nice. But it wouldn't surprise me, unfortunately, with how the hobby's gone, especially in the last few years, and basically some of the other stuff that we've seen, as well. Warlock agrees, and again, that's not a hill I'm ready to die on. That he just doesn't have it. He could be intentionally hiding it. We don't know these days. But I would like to see him come out and try and give more context to this sort of stuff, because, like I said a few times now, he's very confident in his own beliefs and what he's done in his own experience. So he needs to sort of share that with the community, because it's not as simple as just saying, you guys are trolls, fuck off. Because our questions are pretty valid, in my opinion, and we're going about things fair and balanced, or at least I am. I don't know what this was in relation to earlier, so I do apologize. There's so many cards come out all scratched in the 23-24 Prism NBA boxes. Yes, I've seen those. There's a few other sets that I've released recently where the QC is just terrible. I think I already answered this. I don't think it's going to be decertified. I don't think they can tell. So that's basically where things are at. Man, this is so scummy. They're destroying the hobby. I love going. We should soak some Will Greers actually and get Jeff Wilson to sign them. Dan, PSA can't even grade accurately. Exactly. And it goes to what I said earlier about that example of them. It's hilarious that they're trying to be this pillar, but they have standards they can't even adhere to. Like that's laughable and embarrassing to me. Like, guys, realize PSA are just like all the other graders that you want to shit on, right? They're not any better, in my opinion. Got Morant and Booker. PSA wouldn't give me a fair trade in if I complained direct. I'm not sure what you meant to say there. So I think it is, but the one thing that's important here, Multiverse, is that the pressing is done by the grader themselves. Now, that wasn't always the case. CGC, the grader, used to be pretty against this sort of stuff. But when they do it, my understanding is that it's disclosed, right? And when it's been pressed by them, because I think it's located within the grader's notes. Now, I stay away from these things. I don't really pay attention to modern SGC grading anymore. I stick to the old stuff. But it comes down to disclosure. And at the moment, they can't tell. Nobody's telling anyone when they're doing it. So that's where the problem is. So in this case, it makes sense. And I'm all for this, right? Let's say this. If PSA want to start offering this as a service, I'm all for that, because that basically means they're going to have a qualified label that says, yes, it's a PSA 10, but it was soaked or it was altered. And then you can read their notes and say, okay, what was actually done to it? Because that's a win for the hobby. It sort of supports the people that want to make their cards look better, and then also gives more context to the people buying this sort of stuff. The thing is, people won't use that service because they don't want to be financially impacted. I think 90%, that's just a number I'm pulling out of my ass, but I think 90% of the people that are going to use this sort of stuff are doing it because they want to maximize the money they can make. And for them to do that, they're going to have to not disclose it to you when they sell it. So, yes, it would be good if PSA did something like this and had a qualified label to inform the people like me that would want to know. But that just means that people aren't going to send it to PSA to do it. They're going to do it themselves and then send it in, and then PSA can't tell. So, we're basically in the same situation. Nobody PSA started off grading a trimmed exactly. The Honus Wagner is the first card they ever graded, and it was trimmed. I actually thought this to myself, Neo. Good to see you in here. I'm doing my best, but I'm slowly getting there. I don't think Dustin can keep up. Hopefully I'm doing better than Dustin. Hey, Neo, you're going to keep calling out people. I don't think he's ever done that, to be honest. He has pushed back sometimes, but I think it's always been fair. And the other thing I will say, and like Neo says here, being in the tinfoil hate brigade doesn't make you wrong about every take. I agree, but Neo's also talked to some things as well. So I think we can cut him some slack there. From loaded, I'm 2 minutes behind now, so I've caught up now. I'm doing a lot better than Dustin. From loaded boxes to clean kits to fake orders, dude, I'd say they're doing pretty good. It's just funny you keep thinking they're conspiracy. Okay, I think you're talking to Neo. We'll push that aside. Let you guys chinwag in the comments. I always hear the excuse of people have been soaking cleaning cards for decades. I agree. I don't think that makes it okay, in my opinion, either, mate. Mike Petty is telling the truth. Kurt is that. So I'm assuming he's there buying cards. Good to see him out and about, because again, he doesn't shy away from anything, right? So he deserves some credit for that, guys. I know people want to shit on him, but the guy doesn't hide anything, at least from what I've seen. So maybe he does, but from what I've seen on his page, he shows you the certs, which is exactly what got him into trouble here. And I think, one of the unfortunate outcomes is going to be that maybe he doesn't show his certs anymore, which is not a win for us in the hobby, in my opinion. That's not accurate, Dan. Pressing and cleaning is not noted anywhere in the comics. That's my bad. I thought they used to designate that cards or books were pressed. I know they did that in the past, but I thought they did that for their current service. But thank you for correcting me on that. I think my point still stands on that situation, though. If PSA was to offer this as a service, I would expect them to be labeling it. But like I said earlier, I think it just means that no one's gonna use the service, because that defeats the purpose. Card Care is a cute name for duping others. I don't think he's necessarily duping people, Bob, but it is what it is. I'm curious to see whether he's gonna start hiding these certs, like I said a little bit earlier, but people are definitely using his kit to deceive people. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that. That's definitely happening, and you're a fool to think otherwise. Qualified is completely different from a cleaning press. I agree, because that typically the qualified grades for CGC, if I recall, come back to color touch-ups and staple replacements, if I'm right. But you can correct me again in the comments if I was wrong on that, Neo. She is giving him a hard time, I imagine. Yeah, she gave me a big headache this week, I can imagine. Neo, since you're a known name, please tell that to SCR, especially Colin. I just watched the Thursday stream where he was screaming at his users saying if a comic is pressed or restored, it gets a different label. I know CGC, I'm very confident, maybe you can confirm, Neo, but I'm very confident CGC used to say pressed on their labels. But this is before they started offering it as a service, if I remember correctly, but I'm not sure if you know yourself. I know restored books do. What else is there? Apparently CGC have different color labels and state they have clean/press. That's what I've seen many mention this. I think Neo just mentioned they don't state the pressing, but they will state it has been altered in some capacity, using different labels. I think he's copying the text now because there's purple and green labels. So the purple one, this is applied to any book that has evidence of repair. So it will appear as it did when it was original condition. I'm assuming this means, page corrections and staple replacements, if I remember correctly, Neo. The green, a qualified label, is used by CGC for collectibles that have a significant defect that needs a specific description or to note an unauthenticated signature. I think this is mainly for, missing pages too, if I remember correctly, Neo. And then the blue label. This label is given to collectibles that are simply the grade as marked with no qualifiers or special considerations. The one thing that's interesting actually about the purple and green labels, and I know this was definitely in the past, they use the same grade scale, even when it's a qualified label, which is always something that was pretty interesting to me. You've got a book with missing, staples or has a replaced staple, and they're still giving it like a 9.6 or whatever it is. If I remember correctly, that happened in the past. I'm sure they said pressed in the past. I can Google that again, but I'm fairly certain they said pressed, but this would have been years ago. I'm happy to have a look. CBCS, yes, they just do copy CGC and they just can't get the same quality of output, unfortunately. Kurt Oppenheimer, father of the atomic bombs that blow up the hobby. Maybe that can be his new nickname. Maybe they should. I'm not sure what you're referring to there, Warlock. I can't see the bottom of the chat. This is a good reason why it's good to be behind, because I've got my mic basically blocks the whole bottom of the chat, so I can't see. I'll double check after this there, but I'm fairly certain. I'm sure they used to have pressed on there. I could be wrong. I'm happy to be proven wrong on that. It's not a hill I'm ready to die on or anything like that. But I know you've talked about this a lot. I think exactly. I've talked that before in the past, and I know you have for a long time too. It's sort of like I said earlier. I'm not sure if you caught it, but it defeats the purpose when PSA have these standards around things they're trying to uplift and stand by, yet they can't spot them, right? They should, not even have the standard there, right? Because it's embarrassing for them. And it opens up a huge can of worms at the fact that now they've decided to, decertify these things from Kurt when there are countless other examples out there that are just as much in breach of their own standards that they're not going to decertify, right? It's pretty funny. Yeah, I think I'll have to look. I'm fairly certain when I was reading around, to give you context, the reason why I thought they did is because I vaguely recalled seeing it. Now, I'm pretty dumb, so the way my brain works is sometimes I remember things, but the thing that's sticking, I obviously always remember things. I don't sometimes remember things, but basically my brain recalled seeing pressed somewhere. Now, I'm not sure in what context that was, but I recall seeing the word pressed on a label. Maybe that was a mock-up or example that I've seen, 10 years ago, but I've definitely seen pressed written on a label in italics. Now, I need to go try and find where I saw that or what that is in relation to, but it made me think it was relating to CGC. So if somebody wants to Google it now, you can, but otherwise you just have to wait till I'm done. Apologies for rambling. Danny, can we chat about true grading deal? I'm not sure what you mean on that, but happy to hear what you have to say down below. Hell, I can go to Carfax and find out if a car had been in a flood or accident, and I can decide if I want to buy it. But hey, the thing is, Warlock, that you can't tell, right? Like you can't tell what was done. So it's like I get why we compare it to that sort of stuff, and I've been one to compare it to that sort of stuff in the past. But you can't tell. It's just why it's so laughable about what PSA is doing here, because like they're trying to do the right thing, right? They're trying to do the thing we expect them to do, but they can't. They can't spot it. It's just hilarious. So like I said earlier, it took a while for Kurt to get to this point, but he's sort of soaking it in his spray, which I don't think we, like I said earlier, have the ingredients list. Some people have said it's a mixture of alcohol and distilled water. But this is sort of the video that PSA used to decertify his cards, because it's pretty black and white. Should all people that clean cards with chemicals be banned from setting up at shows? I don't think so, because I think there wouldn't be any shows to run based on what I'm hearing. I think the numbers of people doing this is actually quite high. But it comes back to what I said at the start. Like, if you want to do it. Just disclose it to me before you sell it to me, please. That's all I ask for. Like, I don't care what you want to do with your hobby to have fun. Just disclose it to me. So the fact it can't be detected makes it okay. I don't think that's what Neo's saying, to be honest, Warlock. Like, basically what he's saying is he's been very critical of soaking in the past. I think in his video today, he talked about that again. I think it's down to the point of, again, you've got this business trying to, sell themselves or something and they can't spot it. So, like, why are you trying to take credit for something you can't actually do? And it just seems a bit hollow from PSA. And I think that's where Neo was trying to go, in my opinion, but I could be wrong. The problem is PSA doesn't give you the option to submit for restored. So if someone wanted to legit buff up a card and submit, there is no way for them to do that, which I agree. I don't think that makes it okay for them to sort of deceive PSA or deceive people by getting it graded and then not disclosing it. But I don't think that's what you're saying. Jack dealers were openly cleaning with Kurt's card care kits at their tables at the National. Breakers too, and Mr. Minty does the same thing. Striving for Tens does the same thing. There are countless others. Neo, they can detect it. Let's stop saying they can't. If you're talking about cards, Hoff Van Dam, they definitely can't detect it with cards. You're wrong. You're talking about comics. Let's get Kurt's mug off the screen. But basically, you saw him, soaking it in his solution. If the industry wants to get serious about this problem, then these people should be banned, or it sends a wrong message. Like, all things considered, I agree. But the thing is, right, they can't prove who has done what to what. Or what to what, right? They can't prove anything. So how do you safely go ahead and do that to people? How do you go to someone and say, you know what, you're banned for this reason, and then have to deal with the lawsuit off the back of that for discrimination, defamation, all this kind of stuff? Like, you don't have a leg to stand on as PSA right here, right now, because they can't tell it. They can't tell what's been done. It's pretty clear cut that it's like that. And like I've said a few times now, it should be quite concerning for people, because if they can't tell, that means you can't tell. And if there are long-term concerns about this sort of stuff, you might own something and you're not going to know for 5-10 years, however long it takes for these things to happen. PSA relies on keeping their pop reports low for certain cards. Card cleaning affects their bottom line. If all of a sudden so many cards come with higher grade potential, I've lots of people have talked about pop control in the past. I don't buy it for PSA. I've talked this before. Maybe Neo can talk to this a little bit too. It might be different now in the modern comic book community, but when people look at comics, or at least when they did when I was heavy into it 10-15 years ago, is that the older CGC labels typically had a premium, right? Because more of the old school collectors felt that CGC graded stricter in the past, and they felt that they were pop controlling, but not in the way that PSA is apparently pop controlling, right? Because what they were sort of saying for CGC is they were giving you more 9.8s or 9.6s or whatever, whereas in the past those same 9.8s and same 9.6s would have got a 9, as an example, right? Whereas what people say about PSA is they're pushing grades higher because they want more people to get them, or they're holding grades lower because they don't want you to submit cards. And there's actually a pretty good channel that maybe Neo has seen before. He's quite small. His name's Cougar Comics, and he's a very old school collector. I don't think he's made a video in a long time, but he's talked about this in passing a lot, and he cracks open a lot of his books, because he likes to read them like a proper comic book collector. He's very old school. He grew up with a lot of the Silver Age Marvel stuff, and he shares that sentiment around why he chases the old CGC label. So, pop reports, I think you can make arguments for both ways, is where my point is trying to go. And I forget when my rant started off the back of that. I will drink from the water of life and determine all clean cards. Worm brain cleaners beware. You can be the gatekeeper for cleaning cards, Bob, you and your missus. Why do you all think vintage has taken a huge jump in the past few years? It's these kits. We've also seen a bump in, I know here in Australia in particular, and I've seen stories about people at the National seeing a lot more in-person autos too. So I'm not sure what's driving that. I think it's just because they're more valuable and more sought after. Collectibles in general, Neo. I'm saying I clean a card mark on the submission form. I clean a card, mark on the submission form, I clean this card, and PSA labels that are restored. I think that is where it should end up, in my opinion. But like I said earlier, Neo, I don't think anybody's going to use the service, which is where my gut is telling me things are going. It's called ramen spectroscopy, or whatever the hell that word is. CSG has already used it in 2022 on a test print Charizard. That's interesting. I have to read more into it. Someone's going to clip me talking like an absolute idiot there. PSA needs a purple label version. I agree, but I don't think people are going to use it or use that service. But that doesn't mean they shouldn't have the label, right? Because I'm sure there's going to be instances where they do spot something and they have to label it that way. But I don't think people are going to self-report the fact they've cleaned something. And I think that's fairly fairly confident in saying that. Exactly like you said here, the honor system, self-reporting, like I just said. People submit for purple labels in comics all the time, but I think the stance is just different. Yeah, because the purple label could come off the back of many different reasons, right? You know, it's, you know, color touch-ups, staple replacement, cleaning, all that kind of stuff, right? As opposed to like what could you be, you know, doing to a card that is so different. I feel like I'm not making sense there, but I think you get where I'm going. They probably could detect it if they actually grade and authenticated the way the public assumes that they do their job. I think there's a lot of debate as to what PSA actually does too, and how long they spend on certain cards and all that kind of thing. But I just don't think they're ever going to be able to spot it. But I'm outside looking in. Who I could be talking to my ass, like I said. The old labels were more sought after because a lot of them were not clean and pressed because it was before it was widespread. That's fair. That's why it's hard to detect. It's not like they're dipping these things in Acme chemicals. It's 95% water and 5% alcohol. Very fair. I'm not sure what you're saying there, Lancer. People act like they can just do a swab test or something. You know, like that could be possible, right? You know, if there is wax residue on a card, I'm sure a swab test could work. But it's just whether or not that is actually the case. Which further fragments the market. Don't forget there will be a point where everything that can be graded will be graded. And what do the grading companies do then to keep making money? Well, there's new cards every year, right? And I don't think we'll ever get to the point where everything is being graded, to be perfectly honest with you. Neo PSA offers authentic altered for restored, but I'm assuming you're talking about a numerical grade restored. Interesting concept. Yes, Auburn, plus that label doesn't tell you what exactly they did, like a comic purple label, comics, exactly. And I think that's a really good thing that, you know, CGC do, because they'll say it, I think, below the title of the book in italics between the quotation marks, what the issue was or what the reason why they got the purple label in the first place. And I know they used to offer graders notes. I'm not sure if they still do. I haven't really paid too much attention to it. Like I said, I think they do, but previously you had to pay like $5 to access them. I think they are readily available now, but again, Neo can correct me because he pays a lot more attention to comics these days. And I do. I just buy what I like to collect. I don't really, you know, dip into the grading all that much anymore. I'm not sure, again, what you're saying there, Lancer. I really don't think there's any alcohol in that solution. As a copier, printer, repairman, I've been working with alcohol for 20 years. His spray doesn't smell like IPA or, I'm assuming, ethanol. Smelled it at the National. Maybe you shouldn't be smelling those chemicals, but you can do whatever you want in your own time. Bottom line, I as a buyer want as much info as I can get. If I don't, then there's issues. Like I don't think we need to justify why we want to know what the heck is going on, right? Bottom line, the comic book industry handles this whole mess way better than cards. You know, I agree, and it has from the get-go, and even from the inception in terms of like how the labels are structured and all that kind of thing. But I don't know. I agree with you for sure, but I just don't know what the solution is. I don't know how things get better because these graders, they can't spot it, and that doesn't give us a whole lot of confidence, right? So it is what it is. At least CGC have the restored label again. Yep. Exactly. But I feel like, you know, obviously by nature, comic books are looked at a lot more closer by comic book graders than they are for cards, right? Because there are a lot more things they have to check. You got to check every page. You got to make sure the staples are original. You got to make sure that the coupons haven't been cut out. All these kind of stuff through over the years, and there's all these things they need to be across. Whereas for a card, you're looking at, you know, 4 corners, a front and a back, and the edges, and then you're sort of good to go. Also centering, but you know, they're not spending as much time either. And maybe it's because they're not spending as much time, it's harder for them to sort of spot this sort of stuff. Yeah, so graders notes are readily available and they are free. I'm fairly certain they used to be $5 if I remember correctly, because there was a couple of times I had to order them before buying a book. I want a list of all the influencers who've purchased from Kurt. That's what we need to focus on, Dan. Not sure what the first word is there, hiding in the bushes, praying that their addresses and names aren't out to the news. I think, you know, if you are somebody that has been using this stuff and not disclosing it, then I think you deserve everything coming to you in terms of people pushing back, right? Not the hate or the threats or anything like that, but you deserve to have questions asked about why you haven't disclosed it, because we had that example that Dan's Vintage Baseball reminded me of earlier, where you had a clear-cut case of somebody having something rejected. They then, you know, cleaned it, got graded by SGC and they didn't disclose it and they got called out and rather embarrassed, right? I'm sure a heck of a lot of that is actually happening. Well, I think we need the Epstein list before that one, if I'm being honest. This is what I predict the collectible space is going to have a reckoning, and it's not going to be pretty. I don't know. I think there's too much money in it these days for any one thing to break it, to be perfectly honest with you. If a vintage card looks white instead of yellowish, it's probably been cleaned with Kurtz. I think that's also very fair. If you also see a high grade one and it's graded, that's also very fair to assume that as well. Maybe just stick to raw. The only one that's got its shit straight are coins. I agree. Many of the hobby positive crew will be on Kurtz. I think there's a lot of people on that list that would even surprise you, to be perfectly honest with you. Kurtz card care needs to be banned. I think PSA have basically done that. So it's sort of like, let's watch this space and see what happens next. Purchasing and using are two different things. If I have a Kurtz card care kit because I want to understand it, I don't use it exactly. I think that's also a good point to make. I know the double coverage boys who I jump on live streams with sometimes bought a kit to do exactly that. I am planning on ordering a kit myself, actually, because I want to try and do an experiment myself. I want to try and get the answer to what I can. I don't know how beneficial that's going to be, but I want to try and get my hands on one to understand it further. But I think there are probably a lot more people using this thing than what we know. So it is what it is. I need to run because my daughter has woken up and I've got to get back to setting up this nursery. Baby's coming in a few weeks' time, so I've got to cut this one short. I do apologize, guys, but I'll probably collect my thoughts and drop it in a video tomorrow to talk this through a little bit further, because I think it's an important one to jump into. And there's a few other things I didn't get to today that I wanted to cover, but I think the general consensus is that, you know, you can be upset at people that use this stuff and don't disclose it because it is deceptive. And then you can also be equally upset at PSA for sort of not being able to spot it like they try and imply they can, and why in this particular instance they've gone ahead and done this and not done it elsewhere, right? They're not doing as much as what they could be. Give me one sec. So yeah, I got 5 more minutes. If you guys want to raise anything, let me know. Appreciate that, Nia. I think the worst I got was 10 minutes behind, which would probably be a world record for Dustin to ever hit that high. He's always been much further behind than that, so I do agree, but I did lose track there. So thank you for getting me on top of it. Well, message me, Lanta, because I wasn't sure what your question was actually talking about. I'm not cutting early. I got to go. I mentioned that I could only do an hour because my daughter was taking a nap and I got a nursery to set up. I've got a baby coming in 2 weeks, so I need to survive. Hope you have a good one, mate. Appreciate you for clarifying a couple of things for me. But yeah, I'll have a video tomorrow, probably talking about this a bit more, because like I said, I think the response from Kurt was quite, interesting. I say that word all the time. Comparing people asking questions about this as being trolls or haters, I think is probably, the poor way to go about it. And I can understand why he wants to put the blinkers on and get frustrated at people, because some people have attacked him personally very hard. But that shouldn't discount the fact that there are very serious questions about what this stuff does to these cards long term. And you're not a bad person if you're trying to say, well, I want to make sure that this stuff is okay, right? You're not a bad person for asking that question. And currently the way it's being framed from Kurt is you are, because like I said at the very start, he's extremely confident that this stuff is okay. I think he sort of needs to share that confidence with us, start showing some information from cards over the years that he can prove doesn't maybe damage long term. And maybe it's not going to squash all the issues and questions that people have, but it might go a long way to making people feel a bit more comfortable, or it might actually expose that this stuff is actually very bad and it is taboo and it should remain taboo and it's hanky-panky and all that kind of stuff. So, is what it is. Please, share your comments down below on the video. Let me know if I missed anything. I'll try and answer them and maybe address them in the video that I record overnight. So this spectroscopy for the non-destructive analysis of art objects, Kurt mentioned on Jeremy Lee's SCL, there is a bunch of isopropyl but may not be detected by that. I'm curious to see whether it can be done about that. Stop talking about Kurt. I think all the questions in the chat, we didn't get to hobby talk today, but I will be talking about a few other things tomorrow. So, stay tuned for that. Thank you all for joining. I appreciate you all as always, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.